Hello, everyone. I'm JEAN-CLAUDE at Beyond Mystic, and welcome to this week's Beyond the Vault. This is the weekly update, of course, with Mr. Andy Scheckman. You can find his work at milesfranklin.com. Andy, welcome back to the show. How are you?
JC, my brother, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Today is February 15th. We're a day after the Valentine's Massacre. Maybe we can get into that a little bit later into the show. Before I do that, I missed you last week, Andy. There's a lot of things going on. I was hoping to have conversations with you, but you were taking a well-deserved break. How was your last week, Andy?
What do you I was skiing out in Colorado. It was fantastic. It's an annual guys trip, and it was lots of fun. But you're right. Man, I get on the airplane and I try to on my way home and reacclimate to next week's information that I want to talk about. And I feel like you feel like you're so far behind just by missing a couple of days. And that's kind of a sign of the times to me. Like, used to be, things would happen very incrementally, very slowly, nothing of note. And when something big happened, it would dominate the news. And now it just seems that these things are happening every single day. You don't know where to turn, where to look, what's more important than the next. So yeah, let's dive in, man. I know there's a lot to talk about.
It's like you were gone a couple of days and it feels like we had a month's worth of news already in the news cycle. So we'll do our best to get into all of that. Folks, before we start, I really wanted to dive in to the gold standards. I didn't prep you on this here before the show, Andy, but I thought it would be important to go back to the inventor of the gold standard for the cognitive test. He, of course, is suggesting that Biden should take one. Of course, I'm not talking about gold here right now or the monetary system, but just the indication of how crazy things are right now. And of course, while you were away, they seem to have decided here that they're going to pull the plug on Mr. Biden. And the Wall Street Journal, of course, was suggesting that Kamala was ready to serve. Again, a big indication here that tectonic plates are moving here below our feet. First of all, did you watch the Putin and Tucker Carlson interview? How do you think that shapes up here in terms of our understanding of our worldview? I mean, for the last number of years, all we knew was Putin's the aggressor. He's the bad man, similar to what CNN told us for years, orange man bad for Donald Trump. That was the level of discourse. But that 2-hour interview that Tucker Carlson had with Mr. Putin was really in depth. There was a lot of history there. There was a lot of thought-provoking ideas. The guy seems to be on the ball, and we got an idea of how he thinks and how he sees his worldview. Does that change the needle a little bit here in perception in America, and whether or not we still have the stomach to continue this war in Ukraine? Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he didn't. I mean, look, it was a small sampling, but certainly I think he came across very impressive. Very smart man, incredible grasp of history and an incredible recollection.
Yeah,
he did not seem like the boogeyman that everyone makes him out to be. He did not seem like the warmonger who has aspirations on attacking Europe and going after Poland and doing all of these things that they want us to believe. And I think it was very interesting. He said a lot of the same things that you and I have been talking about for a few years.
Yeah.
And in particular, one of the things that I found very interesting about it was how he spoke of using the U.S. dollar as a political tool. To use it as a foreign tool of foreign policy struggle is, as he said, one of the biggest strategic mistakes the United States will ever make. Do your people not know what the dollar really is? I guess what he was basically saying is that if you lose the reserve status or the settlement status, more so than the reserve status, which is one and the same thing to me, because what he basically was saying is that by weaponizing the dollar, not only against Russia but against Iran and many other countries, when much of the Southern Hemisphere views us in a hypocritical fashion. We've talked about how we've occupied Iraq for 20 years after invading them, they would say, under false pretenses, looking for weapons that were not there. We've destroyed their country. We toppled the regime. We're sanctioning 14 of their banks right now. We hold all the money they make in oil production, for $90 billion. Last year. We won't give it to them. They formally applied to the BRICS now. They want to kick coalition forces out of the country. All of these things that are happening, I think he basically said, did the people really understand what will happen by doing this, you're cutting off your own hands. And
I think he said, despite your face. Yeah, you're right.
I think it was interesting to hear that.
Yeah. And I think it wasn't
amazing.
lost on the world stage, and it certainly wasn't lost on me, and I think the North American people who watched that, because he gave some interesting statistics also. First of all, he said, regardless of what's happening in the theater of war in Ukraine, the de-dollarization process was really, really well underway and will continue to do so. He talked about the G7 now the BRICS surpassing international trade of the G7. He talked about the fact that before all these sanctions were done, I think he said that the ruble accounted for about 3% of their international trade. Now they're up to 33 or 34%. And same thing with the yuan, 34 or 36% or something to that effect. And he said that's just growing now. And so we're finding ourselves in North America here kind of outside the tent pissing in. And all these other countries are saying, yeah, okay, we'll do something else. And the trend seems to be growing. So
it's huge. JC, it's the most important thing to talk about. It is because... See, look, what is the petrodollar, right? See, people need to understand that the petrodollar not only is valuing oil in dollars, but it's taking the residual proceeds and reinvesting them in treasuries. Now, first of all, the promise that was made by the finance ministers or at the BRICS meeting was that until we come up, if we do, with a common settlement currency, we will trade in local currencies. And we're seeing that. We're seeing, Russia and Iran say, we're not taking dollars for oil anymore. United Arab Emirates said, we're not taking dollars for oil anymore. They're trading with one another in their local currencies. And instead of taking the excess proceeds and investing in treasuries, they are in fact selling their treasuries and they are buying gold. Now, that sounds like a big statement from a guy who sells gold, but look at it this way. Since the beginning of the century, go back 24 years, gold has appreciated 7.8% per year, the S&P 500 7%, the bond market nowhere near. No. And so they are looking at gold as a tool that has outperformed the bond market handily, has outperformed the S&P, carries no counterparty risk, has no interest rate or inflation risk the way that the bond markets do, or default risk. And so what you are basically seeing is settlement happen outside the dollar, chipping away little by little by little at the settlement status, which will have a profound effect ultimately on the reserve status. And if you do not see continual bond purchases by these foreign entities who have allowed us to live well beyond our means, much of which we've squandered those good graces, and they put it into gold, you start to dramatically affect the reserve status of the dollar. And then they say, well, we're going to lower rates. No, they're not going to lower rates. If they lower rates, look, we've got $10 trillion in bonds that are rolling over from the last few years, almost $8 trillion in two-year treasuries alone that have to be paid for. Where does that money come from? So if we run out of the foreign investment of our debt, that simply falls on either the American public, which or the Federal Reserve monetizing the debt. It's the road to hyperinflation. People don't understand this, that little by little by little, I call it logarithmic decay. I keep saying it. Little by little by little by little by little by little by little, bang, all at once. You have all of these countries trading in local currencies and using gold as a supplement or a replacement, and probably a better one, at least over the last 25 years. It has been a better one than the U.S. Treasury. It's a very, very, very big deal. And what he was saying underscores that. And yet most of that will just go right over people's head because we're not being informed by the Western media whatsoever. You have to listen to guys like you and me and others out there who are screaming, please listen.
Right.
And unfortunately, our reach is only as far as it goes.
Well, if you look at the mainstream media, their heads were exploding, of course, after this interview. And Hillary Clinton was out there saying that Tucker Carlson was, of course, a useful idiot. He wasn't a real reporter, blah, 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 spewing the lies of Mr. Putin. Well, it wasn't lies, because you just said here that the Federal Reserve cannot reduce rates any longer. Here's another example of why. Here in Canada, because of these low rates, the Bank of Canada now just lost $6 billion on their balance sheet here. Explain why that's important, and why, of course, the Fed is caught in this trap here of, one, the de-dollarization, less and less people willing to buy their bonds, and having to monetize it by enticing them by lowering rates here is not going to be successful for them either. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's not just the Bank of Canada. The Federal Reserve admitted they lost 114 billion last year. And those are losses just from paying the commercial banks to park their money at the Fed in the reverse repo and the reserves, where they were paying such a high rate. This short-term lending program that they were doing, and they were allowing banks to borrow money, or to borrow money at 4.75% and walk out the door and walk in another door at the Fed and get 5.3%. Everything is upside down. This number doesn't even fully reflect the $1 trillion+ in unrealized losses on their bond portfolio. They raised rates so fast after a decade plus of stepping on interest rates. And this is where all the manipulation is. So you talk about the manipulation, the gold market, the stock market, the Forex market, all of it. Fine. There are no free markets anymore. There's manipulation. But the real manipulation, JC, it's been in interest rates. It creates a perception and an illusion of wealth. Your house is worth more, your stocks are worth more, your assets are worth more in an environment where debt can be taken, accumulated copiously with much less risk. And then they let rates go up 11 times in the span of a year. And it kneecapped banks like the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve. And yeah, this is something that, look, rates cannot go lower. If they continue to drop rates, who's going to buy the debt? And if you look at the United States, on top of the $34 trillion debt, we have 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government military pensions. Who's going to pay for that? How about the 12 million people who have entered this country illegally? Who's going to pay for their schooling and their medical and their housing? All of these things, these costs are accelerating. And if at the same time you have half of the world no longer willing to do business with us because we've crossed the line. Look, our stupid, brain-dead Speaker of the House and the Biden administration says we're not going to just sanction, we're going to confiscate those Russian assets. And the idiots in the EU are saying the same thing. Let's confiscate it and use it to fund and rebuild the Ukraine. Well, you cross that line, no one will ever do business with you again. Why would they? You fall on the wrong side of the U.S. agenda and bang, your money's gone too. You're a pariah. You're kicked out. These are things that you cannot do. And especially when the world, largely a good portion of it, looks at it as being wholly hypocritical. So yes, it is a huge deal, a very big deal, and will only get worse ultimately as all roads lead to higher interest rates, whether it be through hyperinflation, or the rest of the world just saying we're done taking these currencies and have no longer any interest. In fact, start dumping dollars because they find another way to accept payment for energy. And you're seeing that 20% of all oil sales last year were in other currencies. It's a trend that's accelerating.
And the whole idea about raising rates also creates the problem on the flip side. Here we are at $1 trillion here on interest rates, interest payments alone. The more you raise rates, the more this is problematic for the state. And of course, deficit spending becomes more and more difficult. So at some point here down the road, we might be very close to that now, the US is going to have to start talking like Europe, like Greece was talking about in 2010, 11, 12 about austerity measures. We cannot afford to continue living the way we are now. And the rest of the international world is telling us they're voting with their feet here by doing a settlement of trade outside of the dollar. That means big changes for us. And it means big changes to the way we value things here in North America. I had a few articles to talk about here today also about the fact that, let me just bring up a few and then we'll get to some of the ones that you shared with you as well. Household debt now, $17.5 trillion, and Americans are feeling the strain. Yes, of course. Credit card debt is through the roof for Americans here. Same thing in Canada. Breaking news, the UK economy has officially now, okay, that could have happened a while ago, but they kept changing the definitions, but now they're admitting that they're entering a recession. Interestingly enough, this was on newssky.com. U.S. retail sales plunged in January, of course, worst year-to-year growth since COVID lockdown. So things are not going well here, of course. This is what I wanted to talk about here too. Where do we go with real estate? Well, commercial real estate maybe be the trigger here for the next big crisis. We talked about the rates here too. We talked about the Fed is between a rock and a hard place, but we also know right now that a lot of these the vacancy rates is very high since COVID still. It never came back. And so there's going to be a capitulation of sorts here. And here in Canada, at least by March or April, a lot of the mortgages are coming due to a higher rate than they were when they were originally signed. So more pain to be felt here. What's your thought on where we're going with real estate, Andy?
It's huge. I mean, especially in a place like Canada where the rates have to be reset or reset every 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. At least in residential, where in the States you have 30-year mortgages. But if you talk about commercial real estate, look, you got the Xerox building in Washington, D.C. that just sold for $25 million 2 weeks ago. It was purchased for $145 million a decade ago in 2011. That's an 83% loss on a 19-story office building. That's just one. And, it's funny, Jerome Powell says, well, the big banks are okay, but there will be some consolidation in the regional banks. Well, really, the regional banks are the ones that hold 70% of the commercial real estate loans and 70% of the small business loans. And when these loans and leases need to be reset, when you have diminished occupancy, it's a trend that is going in a very bad place, because I think it will not only further decimate these inner cities that are experience tremendous lawlessness and economic decay, it will start to then kill all the small businesses at the same time that have been there for years, that have been catering to all of the commerce around it. It's a doom loop. It's a very, very bad thing. And for all the people in the States who have a 30-year mortgage at 3 or 4%, and a lot do, that's great until you lose your job. And you're saying, well, now you got 17 trillion in debt, and over $1 trillion in credit card debt, and record student debt, and record auto debt, and all of this debt at the same time, record low savings. It's a very bad recipe, as a matter of fact. And I think
when you look at this graphic here of the house prices versus income since 1984, like that's a huge bifurcation there of the trend. So at some point, I don't expect the salaries to go and match. So I would expect that top line here to come and meet us maybe halfway. Who knows what this correction could look like? Do you expect a correction this year? Do you expect a series of corrections? How do you see it play out?
You know something, JC? I think people who everything I've ever said about what's happening around the world, I talk about in a macro perspective. I have no idea when it happens. I've been shocked by how fast a lot of the things that I've been saying since 2019 have happened. You got Jake here, who I love, who calls me a time traveler. And I had the good fortune of having dinner with Jake and his wife, and he's a hell of a guy. He's just being nice. But he says that because a lot of the stuff I went out on a limb and said actually happened. And, that doesn't always happen. I've been saying stuff for a long time that never came true. But you can see this. And like I was saying to you before, you don't need to be particularly astute or an economist to see the things that are being laid at our feet. You just need to be able to put it together. So I'll put it to this way.
You need to connect the dots, right? The mainstream news.
There's 100% chance it happens. Does it happen this year? I don't know. I think we're living on borrowed time. If it weren't for all of the manipulation that we've seen in the Fed intervention, this would have happened a long time ago. Right. The bank funding program, or all of the things that they've done since 2008, instead of letting the whole system blow up and like a forest fire, getting rid of the underbrush, they papered it over. And when the thing finally blows, it'll be far worse. And you have a whole economy that is an illusion based upon years worth of low interest rates and easy money. And it's coming to an end. As this all has to reset. So, could it be this year? 100%. And I keep saying you have 200 meetings in Russia, all BRICS related, leading up to the big one in October, where already 35 more nations have formally applied. And then you have the election in November. We've let 12 million people in here illegally. Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen? But just like the awful thing that happened at the parade yesterday, if 1% of the people who entered this country illegally have bad intentions, that's 120,000 people who are here for the wrong reason. So when we talk about could this happen this year, there could be any of a number of events that trigger a snowball effect that start to really affect things like commercial real estate, where people just do not want to be in the inner cities because of the lawlessness and the crime and then things that, whatever those things may be, that only exacerbate that. I wish I was more optimistic, but I'm not right now. And I think you're fooling yourself if you are. There's a video on Twitter of a sheriff from Ohio who just came back and said, look, I was at a meeting with 200 other sheriffs from around the country. president won't meet with us. So we met with the FBI, and the FBI said it's a matter of when, not if, something's going to happen. Well, how many times do you need to hear that? So when we put all of this together, it's all intertwined. It's all combined. Yes, that one. Everyone should listen to it. It's scary as hell. It's all combined. You can have a great building, but if everyone around you is leaving, and my son works for Price Waterhouse, and he's like, no one ever comes in the office. We only have to be there 1 or 2 days a week. It's one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. Well, that's just one. If everyone's working from home, if no one's in these buildings, what happens to the surrounding area? And it's like if you pull a pro sports team out of a downtown area and they don't have any more, what happens to that area, to the restaurants, to the bars, to the small businesses? What happens? Does it become more crime-ridden, et cetera? And now do it on a much larger scale? Yeah, I think the commercial real estate is a really big problem that will probably bring down the banks, or a good number of them, and really start to catalyze the problems that we talk about.
I heard a lot of people also for whom their home is their only investment. So it's going to be a difficult time to traverse. Let's go back across the seas here for a moment. The U.S. is very concerned about China's hold on mineral supply chains here. Why is that important right now? What do you want to share with the audience members of how this ties into the big radar picture here?
Well, I think it's a huge deal. I mean, the United Kingdom just recently came out with a report and said, critical minerals such as cobalt and lithium, they're essential to modern technology, to national security, and the transition to a green economy. But after years of ignoring this and trade, globalized free market trading, the bottom line is that the United States and much of the European Union and probably much of Canada is completely dependent on imports for critical minerals and mineral production. And then most of these countries in the West lack the necessary mines to be self-sufficient. And so, when you talk about, it's not just precious metals. And that's what Zoltan Pozsar talks about. JC talks about, we are entering a new system that is moving away from opaque debt instruments and one that is backed by commodities and real world things. And, it just simply means that most of these Western countries are going to be reliant on a global supply chain under increasing pressure from other countries to gain the same limited resources. And, namely China is whom we're going to be dependent upon. They produce the majority, and the Eurasian continent, Indonesia, they produce all the rare earth metals. So, it's a scary thing. Not only are they turning up the heat with arbitrage on the exchanges by pricing gold and silver much higher on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, $80-$90 higher in gold and $2.50 or more higher in silver. You're beginning to see the production of all of these rare earth metals, and they're the United States and Canada and the European Union is not in a good position to be reliant upon these countries when we are moving into a green space. And think about that. At the same time we're going green, we're turning our back on countries like Saudi Arabia, who are then finding, common ground. And when we talk about the BRICS, just understand that all of these countries are not doing it out of coercion. It's a cooperative manner. They don't owe anything to any of the BRICS countries. They're all there because they want to be in a cooperative manner. And so that's how trade and business is supposed to be conducted, not through coercion, but through cooperation. This is something that will not go away either. And we haven't thought this out. So we go into a green revolution, but where do you get all the metals and the battery production to do this? Well, most all of it is in the Eurasian continent.
Right. I wanted to ask you a question from the chat. Interesting to me. Let's tackle this. Mark says, why are some truthers saying gold and silver will be worth nothing? Where are they getting this? Is this miseducation? Is this misinformation? How do we tackle this one?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe they think cryptocurrency is what is going to be the thing. But look, I mean, if that were true, then why would the most well-funded and, more importantly, well-informed traders in the world, the central banks, be buying gold and silver at levels the world has never seen? Why did India import 400 million ounces of silver? Why did we see well, let me just actually give you the exact numbers here. I just wrote it down. Why did we see over the last 2.5 years, 350 million ounces of silver taken off of COMEX? And why did we see 40 million ounces of gold taken off COMEX in the last 3 years? Why did we see 877,000 ounces of gold be delivered off of COMEX last week? I don't know if I can ever remember seeing that big of a delivery ever in one time. Who's buying it all?
And why?
And where is it going? Why did we see 5.5 million ounces of silver delivered out of the COMEX registered category this week? And the week's not even over yet. So
what trade are they front running is the question.
Right. And so at the same time, they have a whole culture of people believing that, it's a pet rock. But what asset do all the central banks own? Well, that'd be gold. What assets, what assets are not owned by every central bank? And that would be cryptocurrency. So while I'm not a crypto basher, typically you hear this from the crypto community. And I have always been of the mindset that it doesn't have to be both. They don't have to be mutually exclusive of one another. You should own both. But I think anyone who says that completely ignores history. And gold and silver, I say it all the time, they've lived through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic. And the central banks who are accumulating it all not only are the most well-funded, they're the most well-informed. And that's the part that people don't get.
Right.
So, misdirection, you want to be misdirected by rhetoric and by price. Well, that's exactly what the big cartel banks that are trying to hold down the price to keep this illusion of dollar supremacy going as long as they can. Well, it's not lost on the rest of the world.
If I were trying to acquire massive gold and silver on the sly, of course I would put out disinformation campaigns to say it's worth nothing, so I could buy it on the cheap. That's
exactly what they're doing, and they use the suppression of the Western market to do that. And at the same time, you can see it's being drained. How about this one? And I don't know if I may have mentioned this last week. I don't know, but there's this talk about the LBMA is going to start to the LBMA is going to trade contracts that are listed on the Shanghai Exchange. Well, we already said that the metal is 10-12% higher in silver and 6-8% higher in gold in Shanghai. But how many people know that Hong Kong or China bought the LBMA a few years ago? Right. And now the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, and now China wants to start warehousing metals traded on the LBMA in China. So do we see a problem here? And when we talk about the way that
the levers of control, they're moving to they do
it slowly and methodically. They don't. Everyone in this country who says things like that, which I believe are very non-sophisticated and immature way of looking at it, for lack of a better way of saying it, their instant gratification is not quick enough. I get it. I understand that. It's easy to believe that when you live in a cryptocurrency world where bang, like that, you make a gazillion bucks. But these countries are doing things very methodically, and they're dotting their I's and they're crossing their T's. They're playing chess.
We're playing the long game. Yeah, for sure. Let's put on our conconspiracy caps a little bit. What cap do you have on right now, Miles? Okay, I need one of those triple-digit silver caps. Do you have those by any chance?
No, but I'll make them just for you if you want. I got the shirts.
I love the shirt.
Send you one of those too.
I love it. Okay, let's do some conspiracy talk. So this is conjecture on our part, but I remember a lot of our conversations with you and I and Bill Holter. We talked about how at some point here there's no more road to kick the can down from, and they're going to need an excuse to explain the crash, the value of the dollar, the pension funds being gone, and all of these problems on something to then be able to introduce their solution, whether that's their CBDC, which we think is part of where they want to go. This week, we were treated to something that could lead to that scenario. So I wanted to have your take on this. So this was basically the White House telling the audience here that there was a national security threat. It comes from space. We can't tell you exactly what it is yet. You're not an imminent threat, but still, we want this to be declassified, and we're in full confidence that the president, who should be taking a gold standard test for cognitive decline, is in full control. And that was interesting because in the backdrop of that, a couple of years ago, and I found this article, this was from 2021 by U.S. Space Command. They were saying how Russians' direct ascent anti-satellite missile tests was very problematic. So I think this is kind of what they're alluding to. Is it possible here that maybe we're going to be treated to this type of satellite warfare that could bring down maybe the financial system, which would be the perfect excuse for some, see, we told you, Russia bad, Putin bad, they crashed their system, and here we go, here's the CBDC. Are we close to that? Is that perhaps a trial balloon they're trying to put forward here?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think that's what they're doing. My mentor, Richard Russell, used to always say there are two choices the Federal Reserve has: to inflate or die. And that's why I've gone out on a limb, and taken flack for it by saying, hey, this is too stupid to be stupid. It's planned. And that's why you look at Jared Bernstein, the lead economic advisor to the U.S. government, whose whole theory is to lose the reserve status. So what do? You weaponize the dollar, you sign an executive order to go green. And when they dump the dollar, creating this horrible moment, you have a villain to point to: Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC, and however you draw it up. What are they talking about all the time now? A cyber attack. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can blow up a nuclear weapon up in the atmosphere and everything blows up like that, or just like a solar flare. Well,
or take control of the satellites and change our comms. Yeah, exactly.
And however you want to point to it, there is no question, I believe, but that they will point to a villain and deflect the blame that should be squarely upon the people who, like the Federal Reserve and the brain dead fiscal policy of this government. Instead, they'll find a villain to point to, and Putin will certainly fit the bill, as will Xi Jinping and OPEC and all the countries that are rallying against the West. So yeah, it's not conspiracy, and that's exactly what they're saying, that they have the ability to launch nuclear missiles from out in space. And there is a fine line between conspiracy and reality, JC. And the funny thing is, like you and I were saying before we jumped on here, much of this stuff that I get accused of being a brokered record for, I don't care. I mean, it's like it's all coming true. Go back and watch my broken record videos from 2019 and 2020 and tell me how accurate I've been. I'm not a soothsayer. I don't read a crystal ball, but you can see this. And if you don't see it, you're not paying attention. And I just don't understand why there are very few people who don't see it. And so that's my mission, is to get out and tell everyone until they're sick and tired of hearing of it. This is coming, and you can see it is coming. So if you don't get out of the way of it, you're going to get run over by it.
Right. You were talking about central banks here, the big actors hoarding gold and accelerating their buying spree here also in 2024. I thought this was also interesting. Druckenmiller dumps Alphabet, Amazon, and Broadcom. But if you go into the article here, but at the same time is scooping up shares of beaten down gold miners like Barrick Gold and Newmont Corp. So a lot of people are getting the message here. Explain that to the audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, how do these people become wealthy? They do things. I mean, they do things when everyone else is going the other direction. You listen to Rick Rule, and he'll tell you the most money he's ever made is when he was buying things that were completely neglected and unwanted. And the biggest amount of money he ever made is he bought some form of a resource company, and he was so convinced it was the right thing to do, and it fell by 50%. And instead of dumping it, he doubled down, and he became very wealthy after that. You look at buying low and selling high. You look at the people who are sophisticated. They're always ahead of the crowd. Look at who's buying gold ahead of this right now. That's the most well-informed traders in the world, the central banks and the commercial banks. They're the ones who know the playbook. So when you see a guy like Druckenmiller, who he swims in circles where he knows what's happening and what's coming. Mm-hmm. You don't get to these places by being a fool. Yeah. And so if nothing else, he's buying assets that are massively undervalued at a period of time when, people like that comment have, I think, begun to look. They've become frustrated and capitulated, and a lot of the people who might even say that were the ones who bought it, thinking of this big moonshot. But the longer this happens, and the more frustrated people get, and the more people start dumping these positions, the more I am convinced that through a contrarian indicator, we're getting really close to that moment. Because those are the people who shouldn't have bought it to begin with. They bought gold and silver to become wealthy instead of realizing it is wealth. Right. A guy like Druckenmiller understands that, but not as well as the central banks who really understand it. And when you see that kind of acquisition, at the same time, the draining of the biggest exchanges in the world, which is not easy to do, it's got to tell you it's coming. When, I don't know. Don't look at it with a time frame, and just understand the macro reality is growing by the day. And guy like Druckenmiller, I think, is a good indicator of that.
Yeah. Let's look at the when here. So here are the BRICS. Nigeria plans to sell oil in local currency, not the US dollars. So again, accelerating here this de-dollarization. Zimbabwe here amassing gold reserves to stabilize their currency, a golden strategy. And this is in the backdrop, of course, of the VIX acting up like crazy. We're talking about Volmageddon here, of course, volatility index. And also this one here, it's feeling like the last days of Rome, market heading for a giant gamma squeeze blow off top. Are we close to that hyperinflation?
Yeah, if you look at the breadth, BREDTH, of the market, it's going straight inverse of that graph. It's going down. It's like this, right? Yeah. And it's because 7 stocks are leading the market. You go back through history, you will never, ever find a time where that happened where it didn't end badly. The majority of the Russell 2000 are down. The majority of the S&P 500 is down. You pull those 7 stocks out, it's all down. And NVIDIA is not even a U.S. company. It's South Korean. The point of it is that you have just a handful of stocks leading the entire market. That is not good. And if you read that article about Druckenmiller, it says he sold off a lot of his tech to buy this position in gold. I'm not saying that's what people should do. I'm just simply saying that this is something that is not healthy. If it were healthy, you would see a large majority of the Russell 2000 going higher. But what you're really seeing is that the businesses in this country largely are struggling. But the AI businesses and these, super sophisticated business that will drastically change the landscape of employment in this country, like they're talking, these idiots in California, about raising the minimum wage to $50 an hour. All you're going to do is make companies like McDonald's and the fast food restaurants get rid of all human employees and have 1 or 2 people there, and the rest will be computers and machines. I mean, people just don't understand that what's happening right now is very bad when you look at a market that's going parabolic, but only the AI stocks bringing it up and the rest of the stocks are by and large not doing well. That's very sick and corrosive, and yet they spin it another way. Just like they tell us the labor market is so healthy when they revise 440,000 jobs, or 40% of the job creation, quietly the first week in January.
Oops, that was a mistake.
Yes, and so it's misdirection, right? At the same time this is happening, what are all the billionaires doing? Oh, that's right. They're selling all their shares. I forgot about that. Jamie Dimon and Jeff Bezos and all of these people, the CFO of Discover, and they're all dumping shares.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What's his name? Facebook guy. They're all dumping them. Do you think that they are just greedy and want dollars, or do they see that there's never been a time when breadth and performance go like this where it didn't collapse? So who knows when it's going to collapse? I don't know, but history says it will.
We're very close. You had something on your Twitter earlier today. Let me see if I can find it. I love this one. Little by little, and then all at once. Yeah, we're almost there.
I think that, JC, I'm dead serious. That I have someone in my office who posts a lot of this stuff for me. I do post some, and I do respond to some personally. I responded to Robert Kiyosaki last night personally, but there are. I don't think there's a better way of describing the world right now than logarithmic decay, socially, morally, financially, the state of the dollar, the state of the country. Everything is little by little by little by little by little. It's chopping down a redwood tree with a butter knife. Little by little by little, it's starting to dent. It's the Shawshank Redemption. It took the guy years to dig a hole with a spoon, and escape. And then all at once he got out. But that's what's happening here. And if people don't understand it, I think they're not being honest with themselves. And the worst part about it is what's happening here, the whitewashing of the culture, little by little, of this country. And it's all part and parcel. It's all part of the same thing. Is it or isn't it? Is it part of a great reset? Do you destabilize the inside and screw things up on the outside in order to assure that when it breaks for real, so that you can come in and issue a new system where people need the new system? I don't know. These are the things that go through my mind. All I can tell you is that the things I talk about are real. Now you get to a point where you have to put them together. Okay, put them together. What does it mean? Well, I guess there, and I do think that a lot of this stuff is intended, and I think it will get worse. And I don't say this to sell precious metals. I often get off of these podcasts and say, shit, did I did I really just say that stuff? Are there people? I did an interview with General Flynn. Do you think that the powers that be know who I am? I sure think they do. It bothers me, but I do it, and I don't do it to generate sales. I do it because it's something I believe in. I got 3 kids. I live in a country that's done so much for me and my family. I want more than anything to help. I do my part. I don't just bitch. I do my part. I don't know if everyone else who just bitches can say the same thing. And the trolls and all of those, you can bitch all you want and name call and do whatever you want, but are you doing your part, even a little bit, to open up people's eyes? And I suggest everyone fact check the things I say. When you get to the point where we put them all together, sure, that's debatable. But you put all these things together and tell me, yeah, in and of themselves, they're all somewhat troubling. Put them together and say, could this all be connected? And it becomes a lot more scary.
Right. It's easy to be the back chair quarterback to all of these conversations, but I often want to say to them, what have you done today to make this world a better place? How have you put yourself out there to share information that is contrarian to the main view? Let's look at this week. We had this weird push down on silver all of a sudden, gold to some extent also. What was happening behind the scenes for this particular smackdown? Do you have any idea what's causing this?
I find it to be very, very funny that, you get these labor numbers that come out, and they're hotter or the CPI numbers come in a little bit higher, and and then all of a sudden, bang, they smack it, right? And it's not how markets work, and it's done for effect. It's a drive-by shooting. I can tell you that nobody has been selling on our end. At the same time, you got 5.5 million ounces taken off of COMEX the same week that they knock it down. Okay, it's just a situation where it's all part of the same thing. They want to. It's an election year. What is gold and silver but a barometer for the health of the country? And I find it amusing that when these numbers come out, it gives them reason to knock down the price, and it only solidifies all the naysayers saying, see, I told you, gold and silver have, just like that comment, they've lost, they're going to go to zero. They've lost their demand. They've lost their significance. That's what they want you to think. Right. And if you can do that through levered futures contracts, it's not hard for these banks to do. And at the same time, the rest of the world is using it to their advantage by draining the exchanges as they do that.
Yeah. We can do a whole show on the exchange stabilization fund, although that is dangerous territory. And I tip my hat to Big Square for getting into that topic there. I remember having one interview with, what was his name? Rob Kirby on that subject.
God rest his soul.
God rest his soul, of course. Andy, before we go, we're 42 minutes in. Let's talk about some of the specials you have this week. You have good prices on gold and silver here. Let me bring up the latest ones for this week. I believe I have them right here. Yes, the silver harmonics, I believe.
Yes.
Silver
harmonics, 315 over spot, and those are the $10 and $20 gold pieces that I love so much. But look, as I've said for weeks now, everything's on sale, and the dealers are loaded with product, all of us, and I will never understand it. I do believe we're in the eye of the hurricane. We got smacked by the front edge of the storm, and now everyone's out in the sunshine, hoping that hope springs eternal, and forgetting about all of the things that have happened. Yet, I would say, in all honesty, I think the trailing edge is going to be worse than the back edge, the front edge, and so it's weird. Everything's on sale right now, whether you're buying in Canada or you're buying here. The premiums are lower than they've been in years and years and years, and the availability is as good as it gets. I don't get it, JC, because it's interesting. At the same time that the retail market is loaded with products, low premiums, and it's quiet, you're seeing more action and movement out of the world's exchanges and by the central banks than any time ever. This is what I mean about information leading the way. The people that know the playbook.
That's the power of the mainstream news and the propaganda.
Yes. That's exactly it. Yeah. And they're using it to their advantage. And whether you believe it or not, just do some due diligence. You'll see what I'm saying is true.
Yeah. In the Tucker Carlson Putin interview, he said something to that effect. Like, what, you want me to go against this mainstream propaganda? They own all the mainstream news around the world. He says it's kind of a lost cause, or worse to that effect. I thought he was right there on that point also. Until it changes and we have more and more alternative media. Thank you, everyone, by the way, for supporting alternative media, for coming to these conversations with Andy and I, and sharing this information with people out there too, so that we can inform as best we can here the public at large. Anything else, Andy, you wanted to share before we go? I think we went through all the slides that you had shared.
Yeah, no, I think that's good enough, JC. I appreciate coming on your show so much and chatting with you. I think you understand it as well as anyone I ever talk to. I think you get it, and I think you're doing your part, and God bless you for it. And I'm very honored to have a small part in your shows, and I'm excited to come back every week and anytime you ask me, for that matter. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for everyone out there. So I hope everyone stays well, has a good weekend. And, I think, as the Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. These are going to get more and more interesting as we get towards the fall. And so buckle up. And I look forward to picking up where we left off real soon.
Well, we'll see you again next week for the weekly edition on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, folks, if you want to join me at 4 p.m. today, we're launching this brand new show here, Janine and I, with Jans, a new contributor to the show. This is a brand new franchise called Expanding Consciousness. So that'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern today here on Rumble. And then again, tonight here, Janine and I are doing the Beyond the News edition for Rumble. This is AmRev 2.0. So we're going to get into how things are shaping up here for the spring in North America.
I don't think you work hard enough, JC. You got to do a few more shows today.
Just a few more. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for
Love you, brother. Thank you, my
so
friend.
much, Andy, for being here. This was, of course, the Beyond the Vault edition for February 15th. I love you guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you a little bit later.
See you, brother.